Inside a packed courtroom, tension filled the air as the judge, known for his sharp tongue, glanced over his glasses and smirked. "So, you're telling me Barron Trump has something to add here?" he scoffed, causing a ripple of laughter among some in attendance. "What could a kid possibly contribute to a case of this magnitude?" Barron, calm and composed, merely adjusted his tie. His expression remained unshaken as he stood, his tall frame commanding unexpected authority. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and clear, "the law does not discriminate based on age, only on knowledge and merit. And with all due respect, I believe precedent backs my argument." The laughter faded. The courtroom shifted uneasily. Even seasoned lawyers leaned in, now intrigued. With meticulous precision, Barron laid out a compelling legal argument, citing cases even the judge seemed momentarily unsure of. His articulation was flawless, his logic airtight. Gasps echoed as he dissected the opposition's claims with the confidence of a seasoned attorney. The judge, initially dismissive, now sat in silence. He tapped his pen against the desk, clearly taken aback. "Well," he finally muttered, "I didn't see that coming." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Even the most skeptical spectators exchanged impressed glances. As Barron took his seat, one thing became crystal clear. This was no ordinary young man, and on that day, he left an indelible mark on the legal world. A hushed silence filled the courtroom as the judge cleared his throat, his previous smugness replaced with measured respect. He leaned forward, fingers steepled, carefully considering his next words. "Well, Mr. Trump," he said, his voice lacking the condescension from before, "it seems I may have underestimated you. That was impressive." Barron simply nodded, unfazed by the sudden shift in tone. He had anticipated resistance. What he hadn't expected was the reaction of the audience, seasoned legal professionals now whispering among themselves, nodding in agreement with his argument. The opposing counsel, a high-profile attorney with decades of experience, shuffled his papers, visibly rattled. He had entered the courtroom prepared to dismantle the case with ease. Now, however, he found himself scrambling for a counterpoint. "Your Honor," he interjected, attempting to regain control, "while Mr. Trump's argument is certainly eloquent, we must remember that rhetoric alone does not equate to sound legal standing." Barron raised an eyebrow. Without hesitation, he leaned forward. "Then let's talk about sound legal standing," he said smoothly, flipping open a law book to a highlighted section. According to precedent set in Roberts v. Lexington, a similar situation arose where the court ruled in favor of. The judge held up a hand, signaling for silence as he scanned the case law Barron had referenced. After a long pause, he let out a heavy sigh. "He's right," he admitted, much to the shock of the room. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the audience. The opposing counsel's face paled as he realized the weight of Barron's argument. This wasn't just a well-rehearsed speech. This was solid legal strategy. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. "This court will take a recess to review the argument further." He hesitated, then glanced at Barron. "Mr. Trump, I strongly suggest you consider a career in law." Barron simply smiled, his composure never wavering. As he stood to leave, reporters scrambled to capture the moment, cameras flashing, voices shouting for a comment. But he offered none. The moment spoke for itself. As Barron Trump stepped out of the courtroom, the murmur of voices turned into a full-blown media frenzy. Reporters from major networks jostled for position, microphones thrust forward, desperate for a statement. "Mr. Trump, did you expect to impress the judge like that? Barron, do you plan on pursuing law after this? What do you have to say to those who doubted you?" He kept walking, his expression unreadable, bodyguards flanking him. He had no interest in grandstanding. His argument had spoken for itself. But inside the courtroom, the impact of his performance continued to ripple. The judge sat in his chambers, rubbing his temples. He had presided over countless cases, faced the most formidable legal minds, and yet a young man, barely out of his teens, had left him speechless. He reached for the case file again, flipping through Barron's citations. Every reference was correct, every argument airtight. Meanwhile, the opposing counsel paced his office, muttering to himself. "How did I not see that coming?" he grumbled. He had underestimated Barron, dismissed him as a mere bystander, but now he was forced to reassess everything. Back outside, Barron finally stopped near a waiting SUV. Turning slightly, he met the gaze of the nearest reporter. "I didn't come here to impress anyone," he said finally. "I came here for the truth." With that, he stepped into the vehicle, the door shutting behind him. The world had just witnessed something extraordinary, and deep down, everyone knew this was only the beginning. As the black SUV pulled away from the courthouse, the city buzzed with speculation. News anchors dissected every moment of Barron Trump's courtroom performance. Analysts debated his legal prowess, and social media exploded with reactions. "Future legal prodigy?" one headline questioned. "Barron Trump stuns courtroom with sheer intellect," another proclaimed. Inside the vehicle, Barron remained composed, his gaze fixed outside the tinted window. His phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from friends, family, and even some of the world's most influential legal minds. He ignored them for now. He wasn't interested in the hype. Next to him, his father's longtime legal advisor, a seasoned attorney with decades of experience, finally broke the silence. "You realize what you've just done, don't you?" the man said, studying him with a mixture of amusement and admiration. Barron turned his head slightly. "I did what needed to be done," he replied simply. The advisor chuckled. "You've just put the entire legal world on notice. They won't underestimate you again." Barron smirked, but he didn't respond. He wasn't chasing headlines or accolades. He was after something bigger. Meanwhile, back at the courthouse, the judge sat alone in his chambers, replaying the moment in his mind. He had walked into that courtroom prepared to dismiss the young man. But now, as he leaned back in his chair, staring at the legal books lining his walls, he realized something rare had happened today. Genius had just revealed itself, and the world had no choice but to take notice. The SUV glided smoothly through the streets of Manhattan, its passengers silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Barron Trump leaned against the cool leather seat, staring at the city skyline. He had won today, not just the argument, but something much greater: respect. His phone buzzed again. This time he glanced at the screen. A name flashed across it, one that caught his attention: Harvard Law Review. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Trump, this is Professor Elliot Grayson from Harvard Law. I wanted to personally commend you on your performance today. It was, well, let's just say you've left a strong impression on the legal community." Barron remained silent for a moment before replying. "I appreciate that, Professor. We'd love to have you visit our campus, perhaps even consider—" "I'm not looking for opportunities," Barron interrupted, his voice firm but polite. "I'm looking for justice." A brief pause, then a chuckle from the other end. "Spoken like a true lawyer already. If you ever change your mind, you know where to find us." Barron ended the call, slipping the phone into his pocket. He could already feel the weight of expectations settling on his shoulders. Offers would flood in. Law schools, political figures, media outlets desperate to get an exclusive. But that wasn't what mattered to him. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Barron's eyes narrowed in thought. He knew today was only the beginning. There were bigger battles ahead, greater challenges to face. "Home," he said at last. "For now." As the car merged onto the highway, the city lights flickering in the distance, one thing was certain. This was not the last time the world would Hear from Barron Trump. Back at Trump Tower, the atmosphere was charged. A group of advisors, family members, and longtime allies had gathered in one of the private lounges, watching the news coverage on a massive screen. Clips of Barron's courtroom moment played on repeat, accompanied by endless commentary from legal analysts and political strategists. As the elevator doors slid open, Barron stepped into the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned to him. His father, former President Donald Trump, stood near the window, arms crossed. He turned, a knowing smirk on his face. "Well, kid," he said, "you just made history." Barron simply nodded. It was never about that. One of the advisors, a sharp-eyed political consultant, leaned forward. "Do you have any idea what you just did? This changes everything. You just went toe-to-toe with some of the best legal minds in the country. And won." Barron sighed, walking over to the bar and pouring himself a glass of water. "I didn't do it for headlines. I did it because someone had to." His mother, Melania, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did well, Barron. But are you ready for what comes next?" Barron met her gaze, understanding the weight behind her words. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was an awakening. The world had seen his potential, and now they would demand more. A senior advisor spoke up. "The offers are already rolling in. Law firms, universities, even political groups. You could write your ticket anywhere." Barron took a slow sip of water, then set the glass down. "I'm not interested in offers." He glanced at the television, where pundits debated his future. "I'm interested in what's right." His father chuckled. "Sounds like you've got more of me in you than you realize." Barron smirked but said nothing. One of the younger strategists leaned in. "Look, Barron, you have a choice here. You can either step back and let the moment pass, or you can use this momentum to do something bigger." The room fell silent. Everyone waited for his response. Barron exhaled slowly. He knew they were right. This was no longer just about one case, one argument. This was about something far greater. Finally, he spoke. "I won't be stepping back." A murmur of approval swept through the room. His father grinned, nodding, in satisfaction. "Good," Donald Trump said, "because this is just the beginning." Barron looked around at the faces in the room, then out at the towering city skyline beyond the window. He wasn't sure where this path would lead. But one thing was certain: he was ready. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Barron Trump woke to the sound of his phone vibrating relentlessly on his nightstand. News alerts, missed calls, and unread messages flooded his screen. The world had not moved on. It had only just begun its obsession with his courtroom triumph. He scrolled through the headlines. "Legal prodigy? Barron Trump's courtroom moment shakes the establishment." "The future of American law? Young Trump stuns legal experts." Could Barron Trump follow in his father's political footsteps? Barron sighed. He had expected attention, but not at this scale. He pushed the phone aside, rubbing his temples. A soft knock at the door. His mother, Melania, stepped inside. "You did not sleep much," she observed. "Too much on my mind," Barron admitted. She sat beside him. "Your father is proud. But this world, law, politics, it will try to shape you, to pull you in many directions. Do not let them decide who you will be." Barron nodded, appreciating her wisdom. "I just wanted to make my argument. Now it feels like everyone wants me to be something I'm not sure I'm ready for." Melania placed a hand on his. "Then take your time. But know this: you have power now, and power must always have purpose." Barron exhaled deeply. His mother was right. Whether he liked it or not, his voice carried weight. And with that came responsibility. Downstairs, a team of advisors waited in the Trump Tower conference room. As he entered, all conversation stopped. His father stood at the head of the table, arms crossed. "All right, kid," Donald Trump said, a grin forming. "You've got the world's attention. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Barron looked around the room. Some expected him to pursue law, others saw a political future, and still more wanted him to disappear from the public eye. But he had his own plan. Barron took a seat, his expression calm and deliberate. "I'm not going to be a pawn in anyone's game," he said. "I'm going to rewrite the rules." The room fell silent. His father's grin widened. "Now that," Donald Trump said, "is a hell of an answer." And with that, Barron Trump's next move had officially begun. The weight of the moment settled over the room. Advisors exchanged glances, unsure of what Barron meant. His father leaned forward, intrigued. "Rewrite the rules, huh?" "Donald Yower," Trump said, tapping his fingers on the polished mahogany table. "That's a big statement. What exactly do you have in mind?" Barron met his father's gaze without hesitation. "The system is broken," he said. "Law, politics, media. It's all built on influence and power plays, not truth. I saw that firsthand in court. People don't want justice. They want control." A few murmurs rippled through the advisors. One of them, a veteran political strategist, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Barron, that's the game. It's been played that way for centuries. You can't just rewrite it." Barron leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Then maybe it's time someone did." The room fell silent. Again. His father chuckled, shaking his head. "You're serious about this?" Barron nodded. "I didn't ask for this attention. But now that I have it, I'm not going to waste it. If they're going to put me in the spotlight, I'll use it on my terms." Melania, who had quietly entered the room, watched her son carefully. "And what do your terms look like?" she asked. Barron took a breath. "First, I'm staying out of the political circus, for now," he said, glancing at the eager campaign consultants in the room. "No endorsements, no speeches, no affiliations." Some of the advisors frowned, but he continued. "Second, I'll use my platform to expose the truth, not just argue it. People deserve to see how the system really works, how cases are decided, how media manipulates narratives, how politicians make deals behind closed doors." A younger advisor, clearly impressed, leaned in. "You're talking about transparency? A movement?" Barron nodded. "Exactly. If people see the truth, they'll demand change. Not just empty promises, real reform." His father exhaled sharply, nodding in approval. "You're thinking long-term. I like that." One of the older advisors shook his head. "Barron, you're smart. No one's denying that. But if you go after the system like this, they will fight back. Hard." Barron smirked. "Let them." The room fell into stunned silence. Donald Trump laughed. "Kid, you remind me of myself when I first got into this game." He turned to his advisors. "You heard him. He's not playing by the old rules. So let's figure out how to make this work." As the discussions began, Barron sat back, his mind already racing ahead. He wasn't just a courtroom curiosity anymore. He was a force to be reckoned with. And the world was about to find out just how far he was willing to go. As the meeting stretched on, advisors debated strategies, weighed risks, and speculated on the future. But Barron Trump had already made up his mind. This wasn't about headlines or political ambition. It was about something far bigger. His father leaned back, studying him with an expression Barron had never quite seen before. It wasn't just pride. It was recognition. "You know," Donald Trump said, "I've spent my whole life shaking up the system. But you might just do more than that." Barron smirked. "We'll see." Melania, watching quietly, stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever you choose, make sure it's yours," she said softly. "Not anyone else's." Barron nodded. He stood, signaling that the conversation, for now, was over. As he walked toward the exit, the room fell into murmured discussions. Behind him, he knew they were already trying to shape his next steps, but this time he wouldn't be following anyone's blueprint. Stepping into the hallway, he glanced out at the city skyline. The world had set its eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do next. They wouldn't have to wait long. With one last glance at Trump Tower's golden halls, Barron smiled to himself. The old rules were done. His game was just beginning. The end.